Ayo and I both worked at Square, but we did not overlap. I got into Ayo's mafia of the Square Mafia through a paper he wrote called the Default Card Issuing Platform, and I was transformed. The result of that read has been one of our portfolio companies has tried to launch Ayo's vision. We'll see whether we live up to it. Let me, without further ado, introduce you to Ayo today, and please, Ayo, just give a little bit of your background and tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got to be part of Square, and a little bit of an update with where you are today, and then we'll dig in.
Awesome. Thank you all for having me. So currently I run product at Carbon Health. And in that role, I'm basically, hopefully, helping transform the future of healthcare and make healthcare better and cheaper and more technology enabled and all those things. I can talk more about that if it's interesting. Prior to Carbon, I've been here about 13 months. Prior to Carbon, I spent about 5.5 years at Cash App. Most of my time there was building out the foundational banking team and infrastructure on which the Cash Card is built, and now the Square Card. In addition to that, I worked on early on some P2P features and growth, and I was actually recruited to Cash App to run a payments API product, which ended up never seeing the light of day. I think mostly because it was just a bad idea. And before Square and Cash App, I started a company originally in gaming and then pivoted to developer tools before we sold it. We went through YC in winter 2012. And before that, I started several companies that went nowhere, which, I think is fairly common in Silicon Valley. All along the way, or more recently, I've started angel investing, primarily in I would say 4 domains: fintech and other regulated industries, what I think of as like founders in transition, founders who their last mission has ended, they're looking for a new one, and their reality is kind of ambiguous. Actually, I'd say like those are 2 big buckets. There's smaller buckets inside them, but those are the 2 big ones. And over the last year, the way Greg and I met was I started writing, and my objective in writing was I had all these ideas that I didn't know who to talk to about, and I figured people on the internet will tell you you're wrong. Like people on the internet love telling you when you're wrong, and so the easiest way to find out whether I was wrong about something was to tell the internet about it, and that's actually happened. It's been great.
I think it's important for people to know that Square had tried a wallet before that didn't go anywhere in its history, and so this was the second time around. And B, Square started really late compared to like with a wallet, compared to like Venmo and a card. But I'd love some perspective about what the journey was. Like, I don't know if you got some of the war stories about why Square didn't have an initial good experience with a wallet, then came back at this a second time around with a much simpler offering, and how Square started, behind Venmo, behind PayPal, and actually got a position in the market and has really moved into arguably a commanding position in the marketplace. Just a little bit of perspective about how that all happened.
Yeah. So a couple thoughts. So first, I think Square's initial run at the Square wallet and the Square card were both ending right as I joined Square. So I joined Square in May 2014. And so I don't know if I would be really qualified to speak on why it didn't work initially. My intuition is, if I think of what Square was prior, like what Square was and what it was focused on when I was working on the initial wallet, it really was the merchant was the hero customer. And so you end up, it's really in the 1,000 decisions that you make every day, you end up making these trade-offs where when you have to choose between what's right for the merchant, what's right for the user, for the consumer, if you're making a consumer product and the trend of your decisions lean towards the merchant, It's not like inherently adversarial, but it just sometimes is. And so if the trend of your decisions leads towards a merchant, it's just going to be hard to like it's hard to make a better product for a consumer when you're focused on optimizing for the merchant needs than an organization that's focused on optimizing for the consumer's needs. So that's like my high level read with some looking back, like when I was at Square, but I wasn't at Square at the time, so I actually don't know what they did. So I think, I would say like Cash App sort of starting after and eventually surpassing Venmo. And I think this is like one of the things that's hard it's hard to say outside of Square because, people don't like, it's just easier to have hey, they had the magic sword. Like there was the one thing that they did well, right? That's the story that you want to hear, that we're trained to hear. But I think the reality is, there's two dimensions. Like one is Venmo literally went through like, two acquisitions, like Venmo to Braintree, Braintree to PayPal, and then probably a bunch of like internal, like I remember hearing at some point that at some point PayPal was thinking of rebranding Venmo as Venmo by PayPal. So like I can only imagine just the organizational thrash that that team had to face, and the founders left, around 2013, I think. So I think that just like there's just no way that didn't have a detrimental impact on their execution. And Venmo is a phenomenal business. Like it's a huge company anyway. It just is relative to the potential. Did it actually execute? I think the other part is Cash App as a team, as with everybody who's successful, got lucky, but also was extremely good at many things. And so like the design practice was really, really good. The money movement practice was excellent. The risk practice was excellent. The engineering discipline was incredible. And sort of many other things other than that, like the approach to regulation, the just ruthless focus on what consumers needed, and user acquisition, even growth, marketing, etc. And so just one thing that's like fairly difficult to like, I wish I could say, hey, it was the design. It was, and it was the other 5 things. And it was just, it's kind of like, if you have quality execution on 5 dimensions and you're playing against somebody who's quality on like 1 or 2, the odds are just like really, really stacked in your favor. And Cash really had a very stacked team on many dimensions.
But I mean, it's just like the numbers compared to like the wallets of any bank. I mean, it really has, and in particular, the amount of money being made per customer. So it's not just that it's a person-to-person transfer app, the fact that you've gotten into payments, now people are using it for investment in crypto and whatnot. The value of per customer is a multiple of what it is of other digital wallets and bank wallets. And so it's transformed kind of thing. I think it's also reflected in some of the expectations on Coinbase, as Square has demonstrated the value of having a digital wallet customer. And I've seen figures that have suggested that as high as a $20,000 value per customer over the lifetime of a customer. And I think Square is doing things like, people are getting direct deposit of their payrolls into Square, and it's really become not just a P2P transfer, but it's become a real payment method. And it's not just servicing yuppies and millennials. It's hit like and been popular in Trump country as well. I mean, it's been a really broad-based phenom. And again, I'm just so surprised. Like I was long gone from Square, and I'd always wanted to see something like that. And my gosh, the wave came late, but it came big.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. Yeah, I mean, I think the I can't speak to the numbers and the values. I think like all I would say is A lot of the potential is still ahead.
So that's interesting. I mean, already just Square as a company now has 10x the value of Western Union, 100x of MoneyGram, and so I'm not sure people have gotten the perspective. Like PayPal now and Square together are worth as much as any major, like as much as any major bank in the United States. The valuation is just. I remember when eBay bought PayPal, and now PayPal is worth 8 times what eBay is worth, and so the numbers here are crazy. And I guess, was there, when folks were there, like it seems like the Square wallet now gets more attention than the merchant side of the business. Was that a conscious objective, or did it just kind of sneak up on you guys?
I mean, I think there's like a couple factors. Like one of them is the team at Cash App still, like, and have worked with Brian, is insanely ambitious. So I think that's just true. Like however you slice it, I don't think Brian, and certainly not me when I was there or anybody else there, ever thought of what we were doing as Square's second act. It was definitely like, we're trying to build a world-class / best in class consumer financial product for everyone on the planet. And so you can argue about whether they've executed on that or whether they'll be able to execute against that, but that's the goal. And there's no way that doesn't end up being massive. I think a second thing that really is just, if you think of the DNA and roots of Square on the seller side, Square, like, I'll use Square versus Stripe as juxtaposition because that's kind of the easiest distinction. Stripe is as a mission, increase the GDP of the internet. Square is as a mission, economic empowerment. To the atomic unit of value that a Stripe transaction provides, which is exchanging a credit card like kind of anywhere, requires much less activation energy, and it is inherently growing much faster than two people in the real world interacting around a card. And so if you just like think of the effect of that when shelter in place hits, people in the real world interacting probably dropped last year to an all-time low as a percentage of human interactions in the history of humanity.
Right.
Maybe, with the exception of during the plague, like I don't know if it's ever been, if the percentage of in-person interactions relative to total interactions has ever been as low as it was last year, which meant Square's core business, which relies on humans in the real world interacting around a payment, there's just no, like, they would just have to like dig out of this massive hole to get out of it. And if you think of what the cash business has become, it's P2P, card payments, both offline and online, crypto, investing. 3 of those 4 things do not require 2 humans to interact in the real world. And so, and if you think of the like sort of defensive dynamic of, at the same time when Square's core business was just hitting that in-person interaction wall, the traditional banking industry, Western Union, MoneyGram, Chase, B of A, imagine for the month last year where shelter in place was like kind of universal across the United States. Basically, there was a month last year when the bulk of new account creation and financial transaction activity shifted from being primarily in person to being primarily online. And Cash App was the #1 finance app in the App Store at the time. So it's just, like the same thing that really put a constraint on Square's core business actually was a massive accelerant for the cash business.
So, the Star Trek leap still that we had, I believe, is when someone who has a Square wallet shows up at a Square merchant, and the Square merchant also has the equivalent of a commercial version of a Square wallet, and that payment just happens essentially as an on-us ledger transaction. It doesn't actually need to go through Visa or MasterCard or a bank. It's like you go to the casino and you don't need to go to the window anymore to get your chips. You just sit down at the table and, everybody's got
Absolutely.
chips, and
Yeah.
so I guess, I mean, that to me is at some level, I realize Square is also a partner of banks and Visa and MasterCard, but somebody's gonna be shitting a brick out there that if this world happens, it's just all an on us transaction, and that role of the banks and Visa and MasterCard is really kind of passe. Or I don't know whether that's heresy still to talk, or
I mean,
where we are on that pendulum swing.
So I think this, to me, and I can't speak for what the cash team is thinking about now, but to me, of all the things that a consumer financial service like supermarket, like Cash App could work on, of the top 10 things, I don't think that's even number 100.
Interesting.
I think there is a theoretical future, probably at least one order of magnitude scale difference, maybe two, where the value you would create by pulling Visa out of the loop or pulling the card networks out of the loop is greater than the value you could create in all the other things you could do. But I think, like, you know, Visa, MasterCard sort of stand out to be these villains. And, you know, how you look at that is probably more of a Rorschach test than a reflection of sort of reality. But I think, like, the fundamental truth is, around a transaction, there's just things that have to happen. Like, it's not like, even a thing I always think about, like with crypto transactions, for instance, is, and you see a lot of this like now being built with some of these smart contracts, is there is a reality where the financial interaction between the buyer and the seller has to be mediated somehow, right? There is a reality where, like, the seller can cheat you or the buyer can defraud you. And right now, I don't know, of the like 2.5% or whatever the Visa, MasterCard take, I don't know how much of that value is, like, you know, I can't say like, hey, they actually should only be rewarded 1.5% for providing that value. But I think it is going to be incredibly difficult in a world where consumers expect that to, excuse me, it's going to be incredibly difficult to not provide that on any like payment network that you create. And then I think so like, all that's to say, like, you can argue that maybe Visa, MasterCard are going away. That concept is not going away. And I would actually, like, in my interactions with Visa in particular, it's an insanely strategic organization. Honestly, more so than literally any other org I've interacted with. So I would not be surprised if after the dust settles, the organization doing that on the blockchain is also Visa.
Yeah, and look, I mean, like, through my portfolio comes we're Visa and MasterCard are principal members.
Yeah.
So, you know, so we're on both sides of this, but it does sometimes seem kind of like when you're standing in front of a merchant and he's like, oh, I use Square, and the payer's like, well, I use Square too. And, like, you know, it's kind of like, you know, you do the bump and stuff like that. It's just like, it's not clear that Visa and MasterCard need to be in the room. Now, obviously, in all those other situations, you need them as that trust intermediary.